Hey guys, it's Santi from Peachwolves, and today I want to talk about yet another really cool 3D website tutorial that we built with my colleague Bura, and this time it's called Passion. Why Passion? Because it actually conveys our passion for 3D web design and for the UI design at Peachwolves, and I really hope you will enjoy the two videos that me and my colleague Bura recorded for this tutorial. So, as usually, I will cover all of the 3D elements and how I set up the scene, put effects, and do the finessing elements in there as well. My colleague Bura will talk about the UI aspect of the tutorial. And like I said, guys, one more time, I hope you enjoy it. I hope it will inspire you to create more cool remixes. So let's dive in. Okay, we're in Peachwolves editor in 3D mode, and what we're going to start doing now is to import all of our prepared assets for this template. I'm going to keep the default plane object. I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to hide it for now, and we'll start adding all of the files that I prepared for this 3D scene. To do so, I can just go and click on the left panel here, this little icon, and see the assets panel opening, and then just click on upload assets here. And what I need to do is just navigate to my assets folder. And what we're going to start doing is starting to upload our main floor grid object, because we're going to use this object to establish the size of the scene, where our camera is positioned, and just in general see the scale better. So let's upload the floor grid first. If you want to see the object that you uploaded inside your scene, then you need to click on it once and it will appear just like so. So this is our grid at the moment that we're going to use for the project. We're going to start uploading other assets in a minute, but first we want this to be a reflective floor. So for us to be able to have this effect, we need to use a water shader. Water shader tutorial, if you want to learn more about that, it is in our series of getting started tutorials, and you can understand exactly how and when you can use water shader. But for this purpose, we're just going to add it. And to add that, you need to click on the left panel here on this little icon that will open Add Elements panel. Then you navigate to Basic, and there's a little icon with water on it. Okay, we have our water in the scene, but at the moment we barely see what exactly is going on. For us to better understand how it all works, let's set up other parts of the scene. So let's change the background color. Let's add an HDR light in it as well, so the environment light. And a couple more assets, couple more objects, so we can have more reflections and understand how we can set up the water and the floor itself. Let's change our background color to something darker. In this case, we're going to just use a completely black background. Alright, now we're going to add environment light. And again, if you would like to understand how environment light is working, what kind of features you can have with environment light, how can you use it, there is a separate tutorial that talks about all the lights in Peachwolves editor, and we're going to leave a link below this video for you to access that if you want to learn more about lights specifically. So now I'm going to just upload my environment light by clicking upload HDR and EXR icon here, and Peachwolves supports HDR and EXR formats at the moment. Let's upload our environment light. We have this file prepared in here. There we go. As soon as I uploaded it, I need to click on it in the assets panel so it appears in my scene. And what we're going to do is just going to adjust a few settings, make it not that bright, and then probably move it slightly in terms of rotation. Now we have our environment light set up. We have our background color. I'm going to add another object, which will be the free screens that I prepared. Let me just go and upload this particular 3D object in our scene. There we go. Let's set it up into approximate location for our scene. All right, so it's approximately where I want it to be, but at the moment I've made it slightly larger. So I'm going to move the water shader and the floor grid objects down to be just below the screens. Perfect, now it's in the right place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the water still, so it's not moving. To do that, I'm going to just make sure I'm selecting the water. And on the right properties panel, I'm going to change some settings, basically to make it still. So first of all, I will start with flow, and I put it to 0. And as you can see, guys, now the water stopped moving. but we still have irregularities of the surface. So to make it smooth, we just need to click flow speed at 1 and wave scale at 1. And now we have a perfect, flat, reflective surface. This is what we will be using in this project. Perfect. Now I want to adjust the material settings for our floor grid object. I'm going to change the color to something dark because we want to have this effect, and adjust a few settings on the reflection side. We will change the roughness parameter to 100 and metalness parameter to 61. All right, we have our settings for the water almost finished, but what we want to do is we want to create a little more effect of the water itself, of how it reflects on the surface. And there is a trick by which you can actually improve the look of this whole thing, is to add a plane object with a color just under the water shader. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to enable our plane. And now it's above the water, of course. I think what we're also going to do in this project is we're going to remove this light, because we're not going to be using this light at all. So I'm just going to delete it from the project completely. And what we're going to do is we're going to move the plane object just under the water for now. We're going to also change the water reflectivity settings in the right properties panel right here. So we're going to change it to 20. And you will see that the water starts to be more transparent. What we want to do as well is we want to adjust the color of the plane object that is under the water to something a little bit darker. Okay, so I would like to change the plane material color straight to black, just like so. And then I'll change a couple of material settings here. So probably crank it up to something like 71, because we don't want to be so reflective. And then increase metalness to something like 85. All right, fantastic. So first step is done. We have our main screens in the project, in our scene, and we have our reflective floor set up. We're going to move it around when we're going to start setting up the camera and how far it goes, but for now, this is the first step done. Next, I would like to add a ceiling into the scene, so we're kind of getting a bit more feeling of an environment. And to do that, I'm just going to upload another file, another 3D file that I've prepared for this tutorial. And what it's going to be, it's a ceiling structure. Let's quickly put it in the desired place in our scene. And let's change the material settings for this specific object. We want to make it darker. So I'm going to change the settings here and a couple of adjustments on the roughness or reflection, just to kind of match our scene style a little bit more, just like so. There we go. All right, starting to look cool. What do we need to add as well? Because this ceiling structure looks quite sad at the moment, we need some lights. And I prepared a model with lights. Let's add that. It's called lamps C for my project. And I'm just going to click it here. And what it is basically is just a group of lamps that sort of fits into the style of the ceiling that we have. I'm going to quickly adjust a couple settings here. So just the colors, adjust again to match the scene style. We're going to add a spotlight to emulate the light that's coming out of the screen. That will create pretty cool light effect in our scene. Before I do that, I'm just going to change a couple settings on our displays materials, just make it darker. And also we'll show you how you can add a video texture into the screens here. To do that, we're going to click on our screens object and we'll choose display texture. And within the texture, you have a setting called map, and it's just under the color. Click that. You will have an options to edit the texture. What we want to do is we want to replace the texture. So let's click on replace the texture, and you're going to be prompted to assets panel on the left to upload a new asset. And in this case, I already have prepared a small video, which is called video background. You can upload MP4 file into Peachwell's editor. I'm going to open it. Okay, and click it. Perfect. So we have our video now in the screen. Let's have a spotlight in our scene. To add the spotlight, you need to go on the left panel here, add elements. Then you're going to navigate to a light and spot. Click that. And there you go, you have a spotlight. What we want to do is we want to create an effect that the light from this display, these three displays actually, is projected on the objects in the front. So to emulate that, we're going to be using spotlight. Let's turn the spotlight towards our scene, just like so. In the settings on the right properties panel, you can just type in -90 degrees rotation, and we have our spotlight set up in this position at the moment. You cannot really see anything because we need to change quite a few settings on the spotlight itself. So first of all, we're going to reduce the decay to 0, and we're going to increase the angle of the spotlight. So the cone that you can see here with these lines is going to become larger. And as soon as I'm changing this setting to something like 79, let's say, or 80, let's just type in 80, you can see that illumination is now visible on the objects in the front of the screens. This is exactly the effect that we want to achieve. So let's just adjust a few more settings and place this light in a better position. We want it to be at the top of our screens here. And we also want to rotate it slightly on the different angle. So probably something around 74, 75. So it looks a little bit downwards into our scene. So you get a little bit more illumination to the bottom of the scene rather than the top, because we're already quite close to the ceiling, as you can see. Okay, let's push it a little bit backwards. All right, perfect. Now what we can start doing is to match the color, or just set the tone of the light color in our scene. Perfect. Let's zoom out a little bit more and have a look into our scene. I think it starts to look pretty cool. Now we have this beautiful reflection of those screens on our floor with this little effect that we created with the plane under the water shader. That looks really nice. We have a little bit of a shadows from our grid on the tiles that we created with this effect. I think I want to adjust the color of the water to make it slightly darker here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of set up the scene and add more 3D models that I prepared earlier. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fast forward the process of me adding other files, other 3D objects into the scene, because that's kind of an individual thing. You guys might want to change the position of this object in a different way. So, you know, that's a kind of repetitive process, and we're going to just move on to the next step. All right, so I've set up my scene almost in full. A few things left to do is I'm going to have to add a couple more abstract objects, because the idea of this website is that when you scroll forward with the camera, the objects in the screen will change, and accordingly to this object, we're going to change the UI as well. But my colleague Bura will show you how exactly to do the UI section later. Now, I would like to talk about how we're going to set up the camera itself, the camera movements, and then also talk about the effects and some final touches of this template. But first, I think what is important for you guys to know is that we have a really cool new feature for the material library, that you can create materials in a library and then you can reuse them with ease to apply to multiple objects. And when you change those materials, they will change on each object respectively, so you don't have to go and change things one by one. And at the moment, I have these glass panels in my scene, and what I would like to do is, because if I would change the theme, let's say I change the video, and the video is going to be yellow or green, and then I will change the spotlight that, you know, lights up our scene in this color. I would like to have a matching color of the reflections in my glass. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to create one material that you can reuse on multiple objects. So let's click on our first glass panel right here and go into the materials of this object on the right properties panel. And what you're going to notice is that you have this little 4 dots icon here. And if I'm clicking this icon, I'm going to have a materials library panel opening. At the moment, there's not much here, and that's why it says that the library is feeling a bit bare, and then, we can start adding some materials. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a new material by clicking this little plus icon here, and we're going to call this material glass library. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up a similar style of the material that we had previously as my preferred glass material. We just go here. The settings I had on the previous one was roughness 19, metalness 100 for maximum reflection. And then in here, I can adjust the color. And because our scene is kind of more purple, I would just gonna go and choose more purple color for our material, maybe a little bit darker as well, something like this. And now I have my glass material that looks like it fits the scene better. What we're gonna do, we're gonna click on other panels, and what I can do now is by just clicking into these 4 dots next to the original glass material, and then just choosing glass library. And we're gonna repeat this process for the rest of these panels. All right, so now I have all of the glass panels with the library material. What I do now is if I would go into my materials library, and you can access it by clicking next to each material, or you can click these 4 dots next to the materials and click settings. If I'm going to start changing the color of this material in here, it's going to affect all of the glass objects in my scene. All of them will change, and this way I can save tons of time if I have multiple objects that I would like to apply the same material on. That's why materials library is a very handy tool for you guys to use. Alright, so that was a really quick tip for you guys on how to use the materials library to speed up your processes. Fine, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start and set up our camera because we want to have like specific animation that would have this interesting camera movements to the sides and also a little bit of a tilt and rotation. For that, we need to create a camera rig, and there is a separate tutorial for that in our Getting Started tutorials, which you can actually check. It's called Camera Rig, and that's very useful if you want to create multiple camera movements without adding too many keyframes, and make it also smoother in terms of the animation itself. So we'll start with our camera that we have in our scene at the moment. I'm going to enter a camera view. And to enter my camera view, I can basically click on the right properties panel. And when I'm selecting my camera, I can select enter camera view, or I can use a little camera toggle on the top toolbar here and click that. And then basically I'm going to have a little window in the bottom left corner of my screen. And what it does, it shows my current camera view. So I can click enter camera view from here, which I will do that. I'm going to close this window, preview window, because I don't really need it. And what we need to do now is by going into our camera, we need to set up some default settings for it. So we want to change the rotation, put the camera much lower in our scene, and probably move it further forward. So something like that. Probably go down even more. Again, it's probably going to be a negative. So maybe minus 0.6, something along these lines. All right, and now I'm going to add an object. In this case, it's going to be a cube object that I would use as my main camera rig. So I will call it a camera rig. Now I want to group my camera with the cube object that I've just added. And I can do it by just simply dragging and holding over the camera rig object, just like so, and then it becomes a child of the camera. What we need to do is we need to reset the camera position to 0 in this case, because we're going to be moving the cube object mainly. And then we can click on a camera rig, which is our cube object, and then we just move it accordingly. So we're going to move it backwards, and we're going to change its position to minus 0.6 and adjust a couple more settings. All right, so when we have our initial position, and we can actually preview that quickly. So this is how we're going to start our animation from this particular point, and we're going to define camera movements now. Let's go back to the editor. All right, so let's click on our camera rig and let's start recording frames. Make sure that auto keyframe is turned on. And what we're going to do now is we're going to change the position of the camera rig. So we need to move forward. Let's click on the position. And we'll click on the rotation as well, because we're going to change the rotation moving forward. Let's go to 20% here. Let's select a 20% in our timeline. And we were going to change the Z-axis in the position for camera rig to 4.2. All right, and why I know this setting, why it's 4.2, because I tried it before, and just for the sake of making it faster for you guys, I already know some of the parameters I would like to use, so I'm going to just add them into my camera rig. I think what we also want to do is just select our main camera and change the field of view in the right properties panel to 50 to make it a little bit more zoomed in. All right, so now we are in this position, and I think what is missing as well is we don't see the full screen and the object, our abstract object. And in order to do that, we need to apply another movement to our main camera. So what we can do, we can just select our main camera and turn on the auto keyframe and put it up a little bit in terms of the angle. So 10, maybe 12. There we go. So now we are seeing in our frame the screens and an abstract object that we have. Let's go back in our timeline, and we don't want to start with the 12-degree angle here, so we're going to change it to something smaller like 4. All right, let's have a look. Okay, so we are moving towards our object, and it's still in frame. We still see the all 3 screens and our abstract object. All right, so let's move on to 40% in our timeline. All right, so from here we're going to start applying different rotation and position parameters to our rig and the camera. And what I want to do now is I want to click on my camera rig and start recording rotation as well from here, from this point, and move to 40% in our timeline, just like so. Make sure that you are selecting with 40%. You don't have to be exact, but I like to be exact with the numbers, so I'm going to stick to 40% exactly, and start adjusting parameters of the first turn, as we're going to start turning the camera left and right and setting up its angle. So what we're going to do now in here is we're going to click 26, and we're going to move slightly to the right, so we're tilting our view, and just adjust our settings here by changing our position slightly. So let's just try with 1, right? What we want to do is we want to keep the object, our abstract object, in the center of our view, so not deviate too far from it. So maybe it's a little bit more, maybe something like 1.5. Yeah, something about that, it's fine. We want to start changing our camera rotation, our main camera rotation here, slightly more. So probably we'll just choose something like 16 in here. There we go. Just a tiny bit more, 16.5. And as you can see, I'm trying to keep the key object in the center of our frame. All right, so I'm going to move to 60% and I'm going to start adjusting my camera rig position once again. So now I'm going to move to different position completely into other side of our scene and adjust some of the settings here for the rotation. As you can see, I'm trying to keep the camera view in the center of our frame. So every time we're changing the positions, we're looking at the key objects in our scene. On the same time, at 60%, I'm also changing my camera settings in the rig. Okay, so let's move to 80% and keep changing our settings. And the last point is our sort of final revealing position of the camera, which we are adjusting the same way as we adjusted all of those parameters here. All right, so let's preview our animation quickly. Okay, so let's scroll forward and see how our camera is moving in the scene. All right. We are having all of those little changes in the angle, and eventually we're coming to this position. And the reason why I'm leaving this on this angle, because I know that we're going to add the last part of UI more on the left side. So this is the reason why the camera position is set to this particular one. All right, so we are happy with our camera animation on the desktop. Let's go back to our editor. Couple words to add, guys, is that in my part of this tutorial, I'm not going to be covering mobile camera animations, because this is something that is more tied up with the specifics of the UI and how UI is actually going to be working on the mobile version of the site. So we will show you how to set up mobile camera for specific adjustments in the next chapter of this tutorial. But just to give you an overview, it's going to be part of the same rig grouped with the same cube object. I think the camera will probably going to change its position, but by no means is something challenging or too difficult. It's a very easy process. As you can see, all it is that you are matching the same positions on the timeline and then just changing your camera view settings accordingly for the mobile. All right, so other things that left to do in this project is I would like to animate these glass panels. So basically when I'm scrolling forward and I'm moving in the scene, those panels will slightly turn and create nice reflection effect as we go along. And also we have multiple abstract objects that will also change on each stop that we created with these keyframes. As you can see, 40, 60, 80, 100%. We're going to be changing those objects one by one. I will show you how to change one, and we're going to fast forward to the end of this tutorial when we're going to discuss a couple of the effects and how to prettify and add final touches to the 3D scene. All right, so let's add another object in our scene, which is going to be the second abstract object. Clicking on it, right, perfect. So I'm just going to adjust the position and materials really quickly for this object, and then I will show you how to animate between these two objects as you scroll through. Fantastic, so we have our object in place, and one more thing to add is that we animated these objects, so they have their own animation, just with a subtle one, to keep everything looking more dynamic in the scene. You can do that in your own software if you're using Cinema 4D or Blender, for example. So you can just create these things pretty easily and animate them. If you would like to learn how to prepare these objects, how to build them in specific software like Cinema 4D or Blender, please let us know in comments, and we make more tutorials that will focus more on how to create 3D assets from scratch for your 3D websites. But you can also find plenty of 3D objects and models readily available on the internet. So it depends what project you're building. Sometimes you might want to create more bespoke assets, and sometimes you can just download various 3D models and put them in your scenes. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move back to the Animate panel. And as you remember, we're going to go back into our camera view. In this case, we have the camera rig that we created, and we're just going to click on our main camera. I'm going to actually rename this camera to a perspective camera. Okay, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to go into enter the camera view and set up the animation for these objects to change. At the moment, what we have is we have two of them. We have the first one and the second one. And what we want to do is from 20%, when we're going to keep scrolling forward, we want the object number 1 to shrink down and the object number 2 to sort of scale up. Okay, so we have 20% in here, and we would like the object number 1 to probably go to 0 at the 30%. Let's click on the abstract number 1. Make sure we have our auto keyframe on, so we're recording keyframes, and let's look at the scale of our first object. I would hide the second object for now. So we have it at 0.5, and what we will do is we're going to change all of those 3 parameters. Let's record this first of all. So we scroll down, you will see that I'm recording frames for abstract 1C object, which is this one. And then I'm moving to 30%, or maybe even to, let's say, 35%. And I am making the size of this object to 0. So it basically disappears from our scene, just like so. All right, so it disappears from our scene, but at the same time, we want our second object to appear at 40%. So what we're going to do, we're going to just enable it. And we're going to record a keyframe for this specific size, which we set up before, is 0.8. Let's record keyframes for this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scroll down and see, okay, I have my abstract 2C objects frames, scale frames recorded. I'm going to go down to 30 potentially, or maybe let's try 25 and see how that's going to look like. Let's 25.1, it doesn't really matter. So that is 0 here, right? So we're changing it to size 0. And what's happening now is we are moving between the objects. So they are kind of, one is shrinking, another one is coming up. You can adjust these settings later on, but let's have a preview of how it looks like. All right, so we're coming, and as we're scrolling in this object, you see that they're changing between each other. I think it's probably, I don't know if it's nice to have them intersect like this, so we probably can just set up the settings to make them change faster. Let's go back to our preview. And to do that, basically what we need to adjust is just to drag these parameters to approximately 30% here and to 30% here for the first object. And in that case, they will just change to add 0. So they're going to just come up from nowhere like that. All right, perfect. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to animate the rest of these objects interchanging as we're scrolling through. I'm going to animate those glass panels as I mentioned, and then we're going to do the final touches on this scene in which I'm going to add some effects and wrap up this tutorial. Okay, what's left for us to do now is to add some final touches to our project. And let me enable the effects panel in the right properties panel here. And start adding some effects that I think gonna add this kind of a nice touch to our final look of the 3D scene. Let's start with a bloom. And let's adjust its parameters slightly. So intensity to 0.3. Radius we will keep at 1. And we're also going to adjust the luminance. So let's enable the filter and put the settings at threshold 90 and smoothing at 25. Perfect. Next, we're going to add the vignette and change its settings just a little bit. So on the darkness side, I'm going to put 65 here. And then one more thing I want to do is I want to change just a tiny bit brightness and contrast. And let's enable it. And I just want to add tiny bit of contrast here, so like 0.5, that brings the sharpness a little bit up for the look of this project. And I think now we have a really beautifully looking scene with beautiful colors and this beautiful sharp look. Another thing that I wanted to mention, guys, is anti-aliasing settings. And what basically those settings do is removing sort of jagged edges on the 3D models and objects in your scene. There are two settings, SMAA and MSAA. We're going to make a separate tutorial about these, but we recommend to use MSAA. That will bring a very nice look of your scene and remove all of those jagged edges on the 3D objects. All right, so let's preview. Fantastic. Our scene looks really cool. And as you can see, we're scrolling forward. All our objects now are changing in the scene. The camera movements are smooth and beautiful. And we're ending up in that position that we intended in the end of the scene. Fantastic. Really cool. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. And now I'm going to give it to my colleague Bura to continue and create all the UI elements in here. Like I said before, I hope these tutorials inspire you guys to create more cool 3D websites, experiment with things. Thank you very much for watching.